And now we're moving on to the concluding panel, concluding plenary panel discussion. We've all experienced the rifted, challenging, complicated political system. Everything's out there, all the muck. And one of the topics is the reform of the judiciary. So today we'd like to ask the question, to what extent is the demand for reforms related to a specific individual? To what extent is it legitimate criticism? And how will the judiciary change? And how might that harm Israeli democracy? How much of an attack is it on Israeli democracy? And we will hear all about it in this concluding panel moderated by Ayala Hasson from the Channel 13 News Friday edition, member of Knesset Efrat Reiten from the Avoda, the Labor Party, attorney Dina Zilber, the former deputy government legal advisor. And I'm sorry, these are glaring lights. We can't see the audience. We can't see if we bore you or if we're interesting for you. This panel will be about the challenge between the authorities in Israel, about the tension between authorities, tension that has been part of Israeli public life in various respects, and we're going to try and address them. Of course, now that the government has changed, the discussion on the changes in legislation that might change the balance between the judiciary and the political system, these are things that are definitely on the table. We don't know what will happen, if it will happen, how it will happen. There are a lot of things that people are just throwing out in the air. Some of them sound very scary, others are not scary. It depends who says that. But we're going to try and decipher this with all of you. I'd like to quote from a book that the Anti-Defamation League edited in honor of this panel, this day, this event. And this poll, only one figure from it is a major source of concern, and it is also expressed in many other surveys, and it's all about public trust in the judiciary. And this is a point that we must all pay attention to. On the one hand, if you're constantly talking about distrust, it also creates a reality. On the other hand, there are enough events which are legal occurrences that are definitely a source of concern, and the legal system doesn't always address it or take care of itself. And had it done so, maybe we could have avoided all these things. The fact that there's some anger, that's quite natural, but let's start with our participants. Maybe if we could. There's a lot of noise here, and it's making it very difficult to concentrate, and we're all people with ADD. Is there anyone who lives today without an attention deficit disorder? While we're still asleep, we wake up, we check our phone. Did a war break out? I wake up, my husband's awake. I see what happened. Did something happen? Let's take a deep breath and try to remain quiet for 30 or 40 minutes, okay? I'd like to ask one question for all of you. Let's start with Dina Zilber, who used to be a senior representative of the Israeli judiciary. You represent the prosecutor's office, and we have two defense attorneys as well, and a member of parliament who used to be an attorney. What do you think the judiciary could do that they didn't do and contributed to the public's distrust? Do you have a mic? I don't even need to serve you one. Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. Well, I'd like, in Twitter, they always have this acronym, unpopular opinion. Oh, I know that in a different context, but fine. Okay, unpopular opinion, UPO. So the unpopular opinion I'd like to present is that I think that the focus placed on this session as well, but it's merely a symptom. But in general, recently in public discourse, that the judiciary somehow needs to be fixed. I don't think that this is a correct assumption, and I think that, if we look at things from a bird's eye view, if we look at the Israeli society and the real problems in that society, I think there are a lot of problems we need to address. And actually, the judiciary is not, so you're saying everything's perfect, it's like paradise, it's heavenly, and all the nonsense that are being uttered in this context have nothing to do with reality. No. But I am saying that there are like 10 action items before a necessary correction of the judiciary. Look at the security situation, at the economic situation, the healthcare, the rift, the social rift, the lack of solidarity in Israeli society, the relations between Israel and diaspora Jewry, the state of the school system. It's true, yes, the judiciary, like other systems, of course, it's not perfect. But one thing, Ms. Zilber, let me give you an example for a reform in the judiciary that actually the system itself tried to promote, and it's actually the politicians that did not promote over several election campaigns. And this is connected to this entire talk about service to the citizens. We talk a lot about the disallocation of authorities between High Court of Justice and the others. I don't think the High Court of Justice is the problem. Maybe you don't. About in the talk of some Israelis and some policymakers, a lot of people say that how come the High Court of Justice is dealing with various petitions. I wish if the entire system would conduct itself like the High Court of Justice. But let's make this more of a Q&A session. You know what? Without distorting what you said, if I am to recap, you don't see a problem. Attorney Tzion Amir, let's gauge the weather with you. Do you also feel that you live in paradise? No, except for the fact that I really value and appreciate Dina Zilber. I hold her in high esteem, but I can't agree with her. I don't live in paradise. Paradise is a word that you use. No, Lieberman said that. No, for him, it's either life, living in paradise, or everything's just like honey. And I don't I don't like these expressions. Okay, maybe you can speak better to the mic. Yes, yes, we can. What the system could have done and didn't do, and it's a lot of things that it did do over the years along the way, and a lot of things that it could have done in recent years when the criticism leveled at it grew and grew, and public trust in this system eroded. And the more this graph was more about erosion in public trust, we were exposed to new phenomena that are part of the problem. I can say as a generalization, the right wing sounds more authentic when it criticizes that, and the left more hypocritical. What's the left? Let me define. I'm talking about intellectuals from the left, and not political left. When I hear intellectuals from the world of law, professors, learned professors, academics in university and outside of it, people with a public standing from within the system, and when Dina was there for many years, managed to get out of themselves arguments that are so far-fetched, and sometimes they say everything's fine. Yes, it's true, the system does need to be fine-tuned a little bit, but by and large, we're a perfect system. What's the problem? Can you give me an example for a problem? Look, if the judiciary, the enforcement branches, and the General Prosecutor's Office is objected to any form of criticism, just like Hila Gerstel leveled criticism, and they went on strike, and there were threats. It was an all-out war. They said, we have enough review and criticism. There's the State Controller's Office and the High Court of Justice. No one could touch them. That, for example, when organization takes itself outside, any option of a review. And let me give another example. Let's take the judges. Now I'm moving on from the you know what, with your permission, let's make it more dynamic. You will, of course, be able to answer him. There were people here who were in Basel, and we saw Justice Hila Gerstel there, and the way she sees it, she was expelled in a very disgraceful and disrespectful and not very democratic fashion, because she dared criticize this system. And she also says that she knows exactly who made sure that she will be kicked out of there and bring this ombudsman who will be more convenient for the system. It's if the political system will make sure that its critiques will only have dentures, will be teethless. Look, these intolerable conviction percentages without getting into the analysis of how this is achieved. And number two, when judges do encounter a real problem of the General Prosecutor's Office or the police, except for some general, finger wagging. But Attorney Amir will talk about it soon. Maybe there's some kind of fear. Maybe it's the same system. Maybe it's not two separate systems. But let's not include everything. With your permission, Attorney Member of Knesset Reiten, first of all, how was it? Was it difficult for you yesterday? Can you hear me now? It was the great festive day of democracy, you mean, the swearing in? No, it's a very festive day, of course, when you come to the Knesset and the president is there to swear allegiance to the state of Israel. It's very festive. The circumstances for us, of course, are less joyous than in the previous term of office, but we will deal with it. We'll raise our heads and fight from the opposition, obviously. As for the question, look, try and concentrate on one problem. Attorney Zilber and Attorney Zion Amir, they both gave speeches. If you could, I don't want to say that you're shutting my mouth, that I want the same amount of time as they received. Anyhow, what's important for me to say is looking at things from the perspective of both an attorney and a legislator, I think we need to separate. Because when you talk about public trust, you need to first of all separate between the ordinary individual that encounters the law systems and the courts on the daily lives. They have a lot of anger. They're not always pleased. Let's set the High Court of Justice aside. As an attorney who represented people who were suspects and people who were victims, yes, there are a lot of things that we're angry about that we want to fix, and we need to make corrections there, and there have been initiatives, and some of them have been implemented. And when I make that separation, and then when I talk about the Supreme Court and High Court of Justice, if I look at the percentages, I think there's 1% of all cases which reach the Supreme Court, and much less than that to the High Court of Justice. And there you can talk about political considerations and elements. Here, politics is involved, whether it's the NGOs that file petitions in order to express this position on something, whether or not it's legal or lawful. Should the High Court of Justice intervene in the positions of the government and the Knesset? I can tell you very honestly, as the chair of the Committee for Welfare and Labor, a petition was filed against me over this past year because of my legislation. I won't come with a D9 to destroy the Supreme Court if the court decides that my decision was wrong and I passed a law that wasn't probable or reasonable, or if my considerations were constitutionally incorrect. So I'll respect the court. But obviously, there are so many considerations that enter the picture here that are not that relationship of a citizen with the court. And here there's a lot that needs to be done. And let me reiterate, at the end of the day, yes, there was a constitutional revolution in the 1990s, of course. And I think that what we're seeing today, that's the counter reaction. It's, just like there's like action and reaction. And I think this is what we're seeing today. And perhaps we need to devote much more thought. And today, when people are talking about the overriding clause, and probably there will be so many discussions about this topic, there's a genuine need for a profound and non-populistic discussion. Yes, that's exactly the case. Interesting answer, Attorney Effie Dimri. You're a criminal lawyer. You're constantly in friction with the system. Are you afraid of it? It's indeed a very strong system. To say that I'm afraid of it, I don't know. Like I said, it's very strong. I, of course, appreciate and value Attorney Zilber. I don't agree with her opinions. Zion Amir is my mentor and teacher. I learned from him, at least according, I definitely agree with him. And I looked at the audience out here around us, and I'd like to talk to them. That we have a lot of teenagers here, and when Attorney Zilber spoke, there was this lady here who called out from the audience. We have these glaring lights. I don't know who she was, but I really agreed with her. She said there's a problem. Because unfortunately, in Israel, and one cannot deny the fact, statistically, each and every person sitting here will be investigated or arrested at a certain point in their life. Statistically, we cannot ignore this. In Israel, every person sitting, statistically, what can I expect? Look, statistically, you can look it up on Google. You can Google this. There are 60,000 false arrests a year in Israel. Just look into the report. 60,000 false arrests annually. Is it true? Do you confirm? It could be even more. See, he says that it could perhaps even be more. In the most recent report of the Public Defender's Office, and when these arrests end with nothing, these people who go through this difficult process of the arrest, or that knock on the door at 5 a.m., their house being raided, their phones being taken, the kids are screaming. This entire show that happens around, it's something quite terrible, and we have to change this. We have to change the basis, first of all, because these raids, if it's the police or it's the special Lahav unit, I mean, whose home are you raiding? These are not top criminals. This is not mobsters. These are people who maybe committed a tax felony, some financial, or a neighbor called to complain about them. You don't have to make all that noise. You can just pick up the phone and ask the person, call him and ask him to come to the police station. And then after 14 days that they are in a cell, in a detention cell for 14 days, and it's stinking from urine and feces, and then after a while they close down the case and they say, oh, sorry, it was a mistake. After you've injured that person's soul, his soul is injured, the entire family is traumatized, and it can happen to each and every one of us. It doesn't matter if we're on the left or the right or religious or secular. It could happen to everyone. We are number one in the world in convictions, and Attorney Reiten said, and she's right, 1% of acquittals, right? Zion, please confirm. Depending on who the defense attorney is, okay, for us it's a bit more. No, it's not funny at all. That's quite a shocking piece of data. Only 1% of acquittals. So once you go through the system, that's it. That's the end of the story for you. What, everybody's innocent? Nobody? No, you mean everybody's guilty? You said everybody's innocent. Yes, everybody's guilty. Nobody's innocent. It's such a heated debate, so I got confused. Look, Attorney Dimri, despite the glaring lights, I see some feedback from the audience sitting here, people with kippot. I see that there's some disagreement They're wondering. Let me explain. So you insist on this figure. Yes, I do. An attorney, Tzion Amir, who's been around longer than I have, is here, and he was my teacher, and he agrees with me. But statistically, there's only 1% of acquittals. You can Google this later. You can Google this now. Okay, they are Googling it. So anybody who enters a courthouse, a courtroom, you know what? You know what they'll say in the general prosecutor's office? They'll say that they're so outstanding that they only submit press charges against people who deserve it. You can tell that to kids, not to people who specialize in this field. Even if it's only 10% acquittals, that's also quite shocking. We are number one in the world in convictions. There's somebody who's checking this and he's confirming that. You are confirming, right? You check that. We are number one in the world in convictions. Why is that? Well, there are several answers to these studies. The first one is that over 90% of the judges who are in the court system, I'm talking about the magistrate and district courts, are formerly from the general prosecutor's office. So, you know what? Just half a second. 1% of acquittals. That's not true. That's not true. I mean, maybe 10%. Yeah, that sounded a bit too much for me. That's the report from the General Prosecutor's Office. It's less than 20%, and also the calculation method is quite complicated. I don't want to bore everybody here, so the figures are better. But also 10% acquittals. That's even that's low. Still, the conviction rates are quite intolerable, and it teaches us a lot about the system, and that also includes plea bargains. I'm looking at the report of the General National Defender's Office, and it's about 1% acquittal. You're also looking at plea bargains, but why do people reach plea bargains? Because they don't want this endless proceedings. It's one of the reasons. In Justice Barak's book, he writes that according to the studies he reached, that 1/3 of the people who plead and plea bargains, they plead on felonies they didn't commit only in order to put an end to that legal saga, because they know that they're entering a system. Thank you very much, Attorney Dimri. Okay, so we definitely have this element of allegedly police, the prosecutor's office, and the courts. It's as if not one entity, but it is. The police is under the shadow of the general prosecution, and I'm saying this from my experience based on coverage covering this field for decades. The police officers, they more or less work for the prosecutor's office. There's no other way to describe this. If they want to act differently, to go against the prosecutor's office, somehow they manage to mainstream them. Somehow they have this feeling of inferiority vis-a-vis the prosecutors, and now we see that in the courts, very few judges. There was a piece I published recently about a judge in Haifa who had rulings against the general prosecution, and she was really targeted. She sent a letter that she's being threatened. So you're saying that it's fine? We kind of made a salad. We mixed everything up. It's fine. It's lunchtime, and a salad is a good thing. We're all on a diet. So questions later. I just want to say something to Tzion, one thing to you, and to Attorney Dimri regarding what Tzion said. It really interested me. You mentioned the subject of hypocrisies, the hypocrisy of the judiciary. Yes, the hypocrisy. So I would like to understand your position, justified position, that we need to have some kind of an auditing organization, and every strong organization that has these important authorities, it needs to be audited, and you need the sunlight. These are all things I truly identify with. How does this work out with the fact that with respect to the Israeli government, the executive, which is the strongest entity, needs to be exempt from the review of the High Court of Justice. Who said that this is the meaning of the overruling clause, the overriding clause? If the government has so many authorities, and we saw what happened during COVID, how our entire life as free citizens turned upside down. Let me just finish my argument, please. And the Israeli government, which is the executive, you have another organization, and perhaps not of all of its decisions are justified, but it has control over the executive, and then they want to undercut that. They're saying the High Court of Justice, why would it intervene with the Knesset's rulings if a law is unconstitutional? 22 laws in a period of 30 years. That's minimal intervention. Just one more sentence. Yes, please complete. And, first of all, one cannot prevent from the High Court of Justice to change laws, but just like you need a certain majority in the Knesset, the High Court of Justice will also need a certain majority. Now the audited system, the executive, and rightfully so, there are many entities like the seventh power, which is the media, so many other entities that review and criticize it. Not every government is being criticized, as we've seen in the past 18 months, but they're under constant inspection. And actually, it's convenient for me that you brought up the media. Of course, you're very much familiar with this field, but I wanted to create this comparison, ask you your thoughts about the media, the press, which is one of the watchdogs of democracy. What's the connection between them and the judiciary? Let me tell you what I mean. It's true that there are always these comments that journalists sometimes behave in an unethical way, and sometimes their exposés could undermine people's privacy. And there were initiatives over the years to establish tribunals for journalists, and people objected to that, and rightfully so. They said, we prefer to live in a society of free press. We want to strengthen the journalists, even if because journalism is important for us, because it has an important role in a democratic society. I just wanted to ask your opinion, the opinion of everyone here. Shouldn't we consider the judiciary in the same way, even if it is imperfect and there are things that need to be corrected? But since it is one of the watchdogs of democracy, it's important to strengthen the judiciary just as much as we want to strengthen the media. When we see other watchdogs, which is, NGOs, the academia, and the government and the Attorney General's office, all entities that are weakening, and there's internal weakening, just like as we have a defensive democracy. And in the overall calculation, as citizens living in a democracy, don't we prefer to have such systems that could be critical of the executive, that unarguably is the strongest and most influential authority? Well, that's a very interesting point that you've just brought up, but I'll give you an answer. A journalist who publishes a lie can be sued the next morning, and that journalist, if he did make a mistake, will pay a lot of money. An attorney, a prosecutor who allowed to use spyware to break into the very insides of an innocent woman, to her bedroom, and just think about each and every one of you, nothing is done to him. In the US, they'd be sent to prison. They write up a report, not even mentioning his name, and just make do with a very weak reprimand. So in principle, you're right that there are certain entities that need to be left in place. And yes, there was objection to any legislation on regulating the media, but there are many entities that critique the media, including the general population. The same applies to the General Prosecutor's Office. There are disciplinary fora. Let me give you the Zadorov trial as an example. Look, let me give you an example from the Zadorov case. Let me give you an example from the Zadorov case. We're not going to get into that. You can remain in the overruling clause. Let me say something very important, and I think it's the most important part here. And I'd like to make a few comments because you received applause and I'm all in favor. Every once in a while, I could also get applause, but I would like to voice my reservations. Look, we need to ask ourselves. Dina Zilber said, how can one even imagine that there would be a government which is the strongest authority with all the authorities one can think of, that it won't be reviewed under the judicial review of the High Court of Justice? Let me first of all say briefly, and then we can move on. No one in Israeli society, I've never heard anyone from the left or the right, and not even in the margins, who want to prevent the High Court of Justice from conducting some kind of judicial review. But a majority of 61, that's exactly it. Look, the lucky things is that the people facing you are not afraid of all this whining and complaining. Look, if you want me to say, if I may say so, I never saw you being shocked that the chief of general staff was appointed by an interim government or an outrageous government with Hezbollah. It's not even Lebanon. What is this, a competition? Who's more shocked and outraged? Why can't you give us a matter-of-fact answer? I'm not listening to you. Look, I think there's something demagogical about it. How come when the right, Effie, it has nothing to do with right and left. Effie, we're here to have lunch and a salad, and we're here to speak calmly. So let's clarify what kind of a country we want, and that's our discussion. Do we want a model in which one of the powers, authorities, is tyrannical or dictatorial, and especially with respect to the other authorities? The answer is no. We don't want a dictatorial Knesset. We don't want such an executive or any other authority that will be like that. But we also don't want the High Court of Justice to be like that. We don't want a judiciary that will be like that. We don't want only one side to have the last word. And let's listen what happened. We need to say that. We mustn't be afraid of saying that. We need to know how to argue with that. Aaron Barak, after everyone will say, and I agree that he was a genius, a legal genius. Yes, I'm aware of that. But he took the legal world to some terrible places because he said, I'm canceling the right of standing in my way. And after having done that, I used two terrible weapons, or one main weapon, the cause of probability. And then he intervenes, and Dina Zilber says that only 22 laws were did that. No, that's incorrect. It's like saying that the results of the elections between the right and the left are 50-50. It's much more than that, because it's intervention in various amendments and administrative decisions and appointments of senior ranking officials in the public system, endless interventions of the High Court of Justice over the years. I can think about a terrible intervention, Justice Meni Mazuz, who is prevented from Ohana, the Minister of Justice, to appoint as a temporary appointment Dani Eldad as a temporary state prosecutor for a 3-month period. He said, you cannot do that in an interim government. You just complained about the appointment of a chief of general staff. I would just like to conclude this. I mean, one cannot let the court, when the court wasn't explicitly authorized to do so, to overrule laws. It actually learns that from the basic law, human dignity. So you see what a heated debate this brings about. Look, it's true that we don't have a constitution and we don't have a foundations of legislation, basic law, and you should know that the High Court of Justice, operates on administrative issues. It's all an outcome of the adjudication. For him to cancel the appointment of Genosar, who's never been sentenced, who's never been convicted. Look, Zion, people don't remember bus line 300. According to the applause, people know a thing or two about the law. Of course they do. You know what the strange thing is? The strange thing is that when the right wants to pass a certain law, all of a sudden all of you get up on your hind legs. But the overruling clause, it was Yitzhak Rabin who wanted to pass it. Efrat, when he wanted to bring Shas into the government, he wanted to change it. But today, when the right wants to change it, but there was objection to it back then. Look, let me remind you that the right of return of the Palestinians almost passed in a majority of 5 versus 4. You need to understand, if one of them would have changed their opinion. Okay, let me just say something. The saddest thing, you can talk about trust in the judiciary, but where's the proof that this trust has been broken? The mere fact that this entire discussion focuses on it being the right or left, but it's true, Ayala, it's real. Yes, of course, whenever the right wants to bring up a law, everybody calls out. Let me finish my sentence, because the override clause, Attorney Dimri, I'm not saying that it's you said or she said. I'm just saying that de facto, this is the situation, that this argument has become an argument between the left and the right, and you need to ask why it happened. Yes, you need to ask all sides. Yes, I didn't say that you just need to ask one side, because anyone who doesn't understand that a legal system which is perceived to be biased, this first and foremost undermines democracy. It doesn't understand what's happening here. Let me answer you, and I'll also answer my dear friend Sion. You know, today there's this column in Globes that checks facts and stuff. You know, they addressed exactly this. Were 22 laws indeed overridden or not, or more? And they found out that I spoke the truth. But Sion also mentioned administrative resolutions, with all due respect, but that's not the discussion. Look, I understand that for some people the facts and figures won't confuse them because they want to tell a story. That's fine, but you do need to look at the facts and figures. And if I'll comment on this argument that says that the High Court of Justice, and I heard this not just from Sion, from Simcha Rotman, that thousands of laws were overridden by the High Court of Justice, and this is not the issue I brought here. The fact that this is where Zion Amir took it. Look, what we said, and I said that the High Court of Justice was an exception. During these past 18 months, I saw that the only entity I could rely on was the Supreme Court. When the press remained silent and you kept quiet, and some terrible things happened here of taking money from the public, the Supreme Court spoke, but the General Prosecutor's Office didn't do anything about it. Let me tell you something, and let me give an example from this year. There were two reforms that our coalition wanted to pass, and who stopped them? The Supreme Court, the High Court of Justice. The subsidies for daycare centers that Lieberman wanted to pass, it was stopped by the High Court of Justice. I didn't hear any shock and outrage or that the right. And is it legitimate? Is it legitimate for the High Court of Justice to stop the subsidies to daycare centers? Let me tell you why. Just like you said, honestly, you trusted for the Supreme Court to review. It can come from our side when we were in the coalition, or from the other side. The question is, do we legitimize or delegitimize a minister of finance? And nobody can say that I don't criticize him if he brings up a proposal that could help endless of disenfranchised populations, and the Knesset will vote for the subsidies. And they wanted to cancel the subsidies. Who wanted to cancel? Lieberman. Oh, Lieberman wanted. So well done to the High Court of Justice. That's exactly what I'm saying. The Supreme Court, why did he want to cancel? But the Supreme Court, why? The Haredis are the only ones who get subsidies. What about Arabs and the children of the poor? They don't get subsidies. he wanted to cancel subsidies for two spouses who don't work. So the majority of the people who would be harmed from it would be the yeshiva students, not only them, but also the Arab population. But moreover, notice how many judicial decisions occurred this year that the court intervened allegedly in favor of the right. It could be the disqualification of Shikli, and in contrast of the opinion of Justice Amit, there was a panel of judges that did not accept his ruling, and the same thing happened with Silman and with Channel 14. Okay, so I'm saying, why, when you're barging into an open door, with all due respect, to shut down Channel 14, God forbid. Efrat. It's not okay. I think I was invited to moderate the panel here, and you're constantly pulling it towards a discussion on the Supreme Court. But that's enough. The Supreme Court isn't the problem. We have some problems before that. Let me ask you a general question. Is the General Prosecutor's Office political? Well, my answer is an adamant no with 3 exclamation marks. Let's take the example of Benjamin Netanyahu, the state of Israel versus Benjamin Netanyahu. You're not talking. Let's look at the state of Israel versus Benjamin Netanyahu. They tried to topple a prime minister with such completely odd and far-fetched letter of charges, and when you bring your witnesses, they become witnesses for the defense. And I ask that in the context of the situation with Gal Hirsch. Didn't the police and the General Prosecutor's Office, wasn't their actions motivated personally and non-professionally 7 years after this investigation opened? And it started with some very fierce suspicions of money laundering, etc. And ultimately they found a question mark. Then one of the greatest tax experts in Israel said that it's completely civilian, nothing criminal about it, and they've been dragging this on for 7 years, and now he's fell ill and lost his property. So who's going to examine and review those who did that? And wasn't a political element involved? Your advantage over me is that you're familiar with this case. I was in the Ministry of Justice for 25 years, 16 years as a prosecutor, but I was involved in petitions to High Court of Justice, and then I was deputy to the Attorney General. So I'm not familiar with this specific case. And you're bringing up this argument that more and more people in Israel are saying that the General Prosecutor's Office is political. And when I hear that, I say that I completely resent and disagree with it. It's just like saying that the police is political, just like saying that the Internal Tax Revenue Authority is political. When since the establishment of the State of Israel, except for the case of Benjamin Netanyahu, when did the State Prosecutor's Office ever press charges on a positive coverage or sympathetic coverage? Look. Politicians who went astray were sentenced, were taken to court on various occasions, Olmert and Sharon, and against chief rabbis and against the senior officers in the military. Against these felonies are defined by the law, but is sympathetic coverage, does it appear anywhere in the law book? I think that it's narrowing the prism of the binoculars, what you're doing. But as for the actual case, there is a certain court case being held. You're not familiar with the evidence. I'm not familiar with the evidence. We read it, and there are countless manipulations, sympathetic coverage. Come on, Dina. Let's call a spade a spade. At the Walla website, do you believe in the judiciary? I believe in the judiciary. We have a panel of 3 judges. Why should it even reach the judiciary? Because 29 prosecutors formulated criminal charges. Yes, 29 senior prosecutors, and they made all possible mistakes. But how come Mandelblit said that is being held by the throat if you're saying that there is no politicization here? I believe that I don't understand such an utterance, especially not by the person who heads the system. He said a terrible sentence. I don't want to repeat it now in midday. Maybe if this were evening. I believe in the system I worked in and that I was part of. I wouldn't have invested 25 years of my life, it's half my life, into a system if I thought that it wasn't a system with integrity and sincerity, with people acting not out of professional motivations. Back then, Mandelblit was Attorney General, and his predecessors and the current one, I believe they all believe in the system. Otherwise, they wouldn't head it. They wouldn't spend 6 years in their lives and such a long, hard work. Are you with us, Etzion, or are you busy with the internet? I'm completely with you. Hold on, I think we're about to finish. Okay, just a few more minutes. We're breaking them down slowly. Do you know that there are 3,000 prosecutors, but in every panel I come to, people will always bring up Ruth David. If somebody went astray, even from within the prosecutor's office, and made criminal offenses, she need to be taken to court. No, she wasn't taken. I hope that the judiciary will find a way to punish people who went astray from within the general prosecutor's office. But you cannot bring up one name of one prosecutor and to let that sully the reputation of all 3,000. Look, it's important. Look, what you've said is very important. It's really important. Of the ordinary citizen, she's right. That's in the context of what I said at the beginning. Those who truly should be punished. You're absolutely right. But not innocent people. A criminal case, I don't think it could last 5 years, that a person will be accused for 5 years, will be a defendant for 5 years. How much money do I have to pay for lawyers? So the general prosecutor's office understand that, so they say, so sign a plea bargain. So I sign a plea bargain even though I didn't cross the street in a red light, and I'm convicted as a criminal even though I didn't cross the street when the light was red. I'd like to say something about this, and you're right, 100% right when you bring up Ruth David. Let me just say one thing, and it's hard for me because I'm not in Gideon Sa'ar's party, but I would like to say a few things he did do this year regarding community courts in order to reduce the caseload and to increase the positions and hirings in the courts so that we have more judges. We need to have judges who come from the district attorney's office. And not just prosecutors. We need defenders. How many of them were defense lawyers? No, since I was there, I'm telling you that you're not correct. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just one concluding comment from you, Tzion. Concluding comment. We're done. No. It's hard for me. My argument, my debate with the positions, with Dina Zilber's position, it didn't start today, it's not going to finish today. It's just, one cannot ignore. I read the papers, you write in your opinions, and when you were in office, not only after you left, there's this great difficulty to free up the population from this sense. If 2 out of 3 judges say that we accept the petition and reject and allow to bring in chametz, leavened bread, into hospitals in Pesach. And the minority opinion will always be if somebody with a kippah. I'll give you some other examples, but we're running out of time. Look, this feeling that worldview and position creeps into, I'm talking about the High Court of Justice. Let's set aside the lower instances. They have many other problems, but it's very difficult to free ourselves of this feeling that position there is part of the rules of the game. game. Okay, thank you very much, Zion Amir, Dina Zilber, Efrat Wright, and Effie Dimre. To all of you who have been so patient. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the end of the day. We've had such a busy and packed day, and of course it was interesting and fascinating to hear so many opinions on so many subjects. So we've come to our conclusion of this day. Have a wonderful day. Less hatred, less divisiveness, and bebinyan Tzion nenucham. Thank you very much, everyone.